That's
Michael,
what I'm
if I
saying.
can, just two Catholic theologians here. I remember Karl Rahner, certainly one of the better-known Catholic theologians of the past century, in this little book that you referred to, The Theology of Death, where he says the ideal death is to choose to die. I mean, if we can be in circumstances where death doesn't happen to us, but we choose.
It's a personal end, as he says.
Yeah, personal end. So, from that perspective, I mean, just that it is a choice, I think that opens the door to looking into circumstances where one, given what the doctors say, given what the suffering they want us to endure, given what's the prognostications, that one would choose to make the move. So, but it's a controversial point. But I think that aspect offers some openings.
Thank you. It is a controversial point. The first thing that comes to mind about this is to say, as someone who, as a Buddhist priest and Lama, I'm often asked to, or we put in people's wills to be called or to chant for them or do the 49-day Bardo prayers and rituals for them and other things. So I've seen quite a bit of this. There's a hell of a lot more of this euthanasia, if that's the right term, or right to choose going on than we talk about and admit. That many families and many nurses and many people are not texting, they're thumbing the morphine drip or whatever a few extra times when the time comes. And I see many of you shaking your heads because this is illegal and it's hush-hush and it's very dangerous to talk about. And yet almost every family must have experienced this at some time when people realized that there was no quality of life left and quantity of life was starting not to matter. And the kindest thing to do was to help usher them on their way, especially when they themselves asked for it, begged for it, requested it. Yes? So that's one thing. So that's a reality. That's going on. I'm not talking about the rights and wrongs or the local laws about it. And now if I think about right to choose, it comes to mind about something that I'm very concerned, I care about, I love about. I'm a dog person. So cats, just joking. I love everyone.
Careful.
Dogs, no. We all have to choose sometime about putting down pets or not. And it's so often the case that we can't let go of the pets, and we're doing it for us, or our children, for us, not the pets. Who are just so miserable and puking in their food bowl and falling in it with their face, and they can't get out. And after several veterinarians have told us it's over time to do it, we're still not doing it, or a horse, or whatever. I think it's not very compassionate or wise to keep life going on beyond a certain point, which it's very hard to be that objective and clear in your heart. But if you see yourself doing it for yourself, not for them, you don't have to question that. I question that. So I'm not one of these Buddhists that will say no abortion and no euthanasia at all, as many Buddhist teachers will tell you. Not all. So I think it's very complicated for a Buddhist teacher to advise that, and then for the word to be out there on the internet that Lama Surya says it's okay to put down your pet when it's not convenient to have them anymore, because your kid went to college or whatever. It's a slippery slope, these ethical questions. So that's why I said objective and clear heart and reflecting and praying and taking really seriously. Cherishing life is the first Buddhist precept, not thou should not kill. And the Buddhist precept is cherishing all forms of life, not just human life. Why? Because we're all endowed with the luminous Buddha nature. We're all children of God, to translate into English. We didn't give the life, and we may not have the right to take it away. These ethical issues are very tricky. So now if it comes to me, I hope, and I wrote a do not resuscitate order, and I have a living will, and there's a lot of things to think about that I advise my students and audiences to think about before they die, before the state and the coroner and the health department starts to intrude. you really want to go through these things and think about this. Do you want to be on a machine and so on? So I think, you have to designate somebody as the one to decide who to pull the plug. Otherwise, somebody will decide for you when you're not able to decide. And it's very complicated today. The doctors are all trained to keep people alive, and they will keep them alive almost at all costs. So you might think about that if you're interested in this field of thanatology, conscious dying. Kubler-Ross writes about this beautifully in her book about death. Sherwin Newland wrote about it beautifully in How We Die. We can learn about this and think about this. It can be very helpful and to have a conscious life and a conscious death. Very helpful and very beautiful, meaningful. Also, I want to say to whoever was talking before, I think it could be a distinction to be made between pain and suffering. So you said you're not worried about dying, but you're worried about getting there. Of course, we're probably worried about pain and loss of control and helplessness. But as a Buddhist wise guy once said, in life, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. How you relate to the pain has a lot to do with you. How much you suffer from the pain. It's not what happens to us, but what we make of it that makes up all the difference. Everything is so subjective. Just think about that. That you can take to the bank.
Yeah, I agree with that part of it. My consideration is really extreme physical pain that's not managed.
Right.
And that can be as traumatic for a family watching it
Yes.
as the person who can't get out of their body as in
Right.
just constant horrible pain.
Well, I'm very frustrating with the scenarios that can't be managed. Because there's often secondary and tertiary concerns that are getting in the way of can't be managed. We have a lot of medications today. Of course, they may cloud your consciousness, but you have to balance things in balance. The middle way is a great reminder: not too much and not too little, not too tight and not too loose, not all and nothing, or all or nothing.
I've been practicing Christian meditation and Buddhist meditation and many others for a long time, and I'm a little actually taken that in this discussion on death, there's been no discussion so far about the realm of the spirit body. And one of the things that has drawn me to Tibetan form of Buddhism is it's sort of understanding with Christian spirituality that there is a spirit body that is real after the flesh body or blood body, depart. It's not that we die; it's just another form of life. And I think in our Christian tradition, we've been so influenced by the rational and scientific thing of evidence that we don't talk about it. And I think that the presence of people in the spirit body, we need that presence, and folks can help us who have transitioned toward that reality. And I certainly call on them all the time. In our indigenous traditions, we talk about calling the ancestors, and they come. And sometimes you can get to see them, but you certainly can feel them, and they'll even, make some noise around to let you know they're around if you ask them to. But and so whenever I get a chance to talk to a Tibetan Buddhist, I really, enjoy going there, because our Christian tradition, whether we call them, guardian angels, which I love that understanding. We can call on them and they'll be there to help us, because we like to screw things up for ourselves. So I'm wondering, and of course Zen, there's no recognition of that. And so many of my friends that have turned to Buddhism, they do so sort of because of the lack of evidence of a spirit presence, beyond the flesh death. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on that and how that recognition of spirit linkage can help us in our own practice and guidance.
Yeah, that's a great question. Buddhists are funny about the lingo, so we don't use the word spirit that much. But I slipped it in before about Bardo and after death and the clear light body. The Dalai Lama calls it the clear light, and about the rainbow body that doesn't die. Yes? So, the thinking is there, like about rebirth and all that. So having said that, for everybody's benefit, so we're having a group dialogue now to address you personally. So who or what dies? Whether you call it spirit, body, or whatever. Who or what dies? I'm asking you. What do you think? Or who or what remains? Or who or what is reborn?
My sense is
what continues? Whatever you call it, in the afterlife, in the Bardo, in the ancestor immortal level, or in other rebirths and forms.
My sense is we enter our fullness, and that this experience is more exclusionary because, science and physics is great here. I mean, the more material we are, the slower our energy is. So the less material we become, the greater our energy is. So it's just another form of spirit or energy, but I think it's stronger. And if we don't recognize that and realize how particularly our loved ones, because I think those are the ones that are connected to us the most, and care for us the most, with that link, that we don't really develop that relationship further and keep it in our consciousness.
So we continue, the spirit, the we.
I think that's our fullness.
And the fullness. This is our limited form. Yeah, okay.
I'm trying to keep it brief.
I'm doing some writing on this, and it bothers me that all of our religions, we tend to start on the material level to get to the spiritual, and I'm asking myself and doing some writing on this, that we need to turn that around, and it's just as easy to start with the spirit and then understand what finitude means and what embodiment means. But we always tend to start with the material to try to get to the spiritual.
I completely agree with that. That's been a problem. Someone has said very well, I think it might have been Teilhard de Chardin who said it first, but we have to stop thinking of ourselves as material beings struggling to become spiritual. We are spiritual beings trying to become human, wrestling with what it means to live in the body, in the universe, in space and time as a spirit. And I think that's a much more accurate way of seeing our immediate connection to the absolute spirit, whatever you want to call it, coming from that. And then learning this magnificent drama, this challenging task, this superb gift of living in a body and in a world of matter and space and time. It's fantastic. And I've been trying to say all along, to answer your original question, that all of these realms are connected. There's no nature, supernature, matter, spirit. It's all a direct line. So when you say spirit body, that can describe everything is a spirit body. Everything right now in front is a spirit body. So I'm not quite sure if you mean the etheric body or the astral body, the way the Hindus speak about it, or you mean the separated soul, as Catholic theology speaks about it. All these are real forces that are up to now. Yes, absolutely. Whether they're dead or alive in our common way of speaking or not. That's why we pray to saints and pray to the Buddha. All those are realities now, right here. Spirit or material, whatever you want to call it.
And let me say something else, since we're kind of lightly picking on Christianity, and we should include Judaism in going in that secular, scientific, evidence-based way in modern and postmodern times. Buddhism in the West is going that way too a little bit, with secular Buddhism and so on. So I think it's good to keep in mind, these are bigger movements and forces always in some kind of creative conflict or tension, working out the evolution of the spiritual process, let's say. And religions are not as fixed as they maybe sometimes seem to be. Questions? Yes, young lady.
Yeah, so sometimes death isn't natural. Sometimes we're killed. Oh yeah, sorry. So sometimes death isn't natural, it doesn't just happen, whether it be by illness. Sometimes people get killed. A lot of people do actually every day. And then in the work that I do at a hospital, I hear all the time, just want to die, because I work on a psych unit. So that becomes kind of a thing I talk to people about, why you want to die. And then what woke me up the other day was a 14-year-old girl who actually succeeded. And so I know that in Buddhism, there's this kind of vow not to kill, as well as in Christianity. So I think that brings me kind of to death. I mean, I'm kind of young, so I don't really think about my death all that much. But this is the kind of death that I think about a lot. It's the killing of others, and especially young people wanting to kill themselves.
Suicide.
Yeah.
Yes, that's very difficult. I think it's sad and tragic, and I also lost some friends young, including my 19-year-old friend who was shot and killed at Kent State in 1971 by the National Guard, peacefully protesting the secret bombings of Cambodia and Vietnam. So one minute she was there, the next minute she was shot by the part-time soldiers, National Guard. And that was a big shock to me. It's one of the things that drove me on my spiritual path, that we wouldn't be around forever, that we weren't all going to grow up together, that I wanted to find peace and become peace and not just fight for peace. And that was a very deepening experience, so I hope you can take this in as, lessons learned and wisdom earned, and gain the wisdom of experience, and become a wise elder that can help mentor people. I would say the bad news is that poor child really got so desperate and driven to do that, and I don't know what, didn't get the help that was needed or whatever. But it doesn't mean it's the end, but that's a karmic scenario.
I saw them film yesterday, Bully, which is now out there, which I recommend, which deals with this very thing of young teenagers, gay and straight, for whatever reasons, are bullied and driven to suicide, and the effect of their families. On the one hand, we can certainly believe that those who suffer are just embraced by, the huge arms of the cosmos, or whatever you want to say, God, that they're suffering, if we believe in the full picture. It's not the last word. Then also, as you were saying, you went on your spiritual path. You sought to be peace in the world because of this example. The example in the film, for example, of the parents of these children who started a movement, who went out there and started to persuade people around the country of the need, to stand up and put an end to this kind of sadistic, original sin kind of behavior. And why is that coming from to begin with? And to fight for peace and justice for those who are so deprived of it in so many ways. So it awakens. We can believe that those who suffer are held by something greater, and that we need to be the something greater then too for all the others who may still suffer in this world. To be compassionate and peaceful as a response.
Can I throw in a question, which is also a bit of a statement, and it picks up, Surya, your question of who dies, what dies, and in both traditions, Christianity and Buddhism perhaps more explicitly and centrally than Christianity, but both religions stress that in order to live life fully now, in order to truly find peace and happiness, we have to get beyond our individual selves. Clear and strong in Buddhism with the whole central doctrine of the not-self, the anatta, or in the doctrine of impermanence. There's nothing permanent. Nothing stays. So to talk about your individual self is talking about something that doesn't exist, truly. And then in Christianity, again, maybe not as strongly, but there is the call to lose yourself, really lose yourself if you're going to find yourself, which means, what you find is not going to be the self you lost. Or the seed dying has to die. I mean, die means die before it can become something else. So, in other words, transcending individuality in order to become something that is not you, the individual you. My question comes, and you've been kind of, for me at least, flitting around this, and I want to hear a clear, is in whatever comes after I die, when Paul Knitter dies, is there going to be a Paul Knitter, an individual that lives on? I don't think so. I mean, Christianity doesn't say that very clearly. They do. Christianity talks about you're going to be in heaven with all your loved ones and all of them. But that seems to contradict what is one of the central teachings of Christianity, that we've got to, if we live only as individuals, we're not really living. So certainly after death, we're not going to live on with personal immortality. So I'm asking the question of, is immortality personal, or is it personal? The way the theologians put the question, is it personal immortality, or is it objective immortality? By objective, they mean an immortality that is beyond your individual. You won't live on as you. You'll live on. You will live on. Life will go on, but it's not going to be you, individual you.
First of all, you're already not living. Life is going on through you. So let's backtrack. Cyclical, not just linear. So it's not just like it stops being you and it starts being universal. Cyclical, unborn and undying, true nature is the Buddhist way of putting it. Big terms, highfalutin words. And then also I want to say, I'm not, so with that theological dialogue about what you said, immortality, is it personal or objective? And objective is a tricky word. But I would say, if you want to talk like that, I would say it's not impersonal. It's not personal, it's transpersonal. In the psychology language, we talk like that. When you lose yourself, you lose your personal, separate, limited ego self, conditioned personality self, and you discover the supreme self, and that's your transpersonal being. Self with a capital S, your transpersonal being. And I don't think that that's just some kind of flim-flam. I mean, that's my experience, and I read that, it makes sense, and people talk like that, other people, mystics and other thinkers, and I really appreciate that. So it's personal in the transpersonal. It's personal enough. So I don't have so much trouble with the word soul, because every Buddhist will tell you there's no soul, but then they'll talk about Buddha nature in exactly the same way. Or rebirth. That's why I asked you, who was reborn? And I'll ask you, if there's no permanent self, then what is reborn? So we need to think about this. And just like before, I told you when you're going to die. Anybody remember what I said? You're going to die every moment, again and again, as long as you don't remember who your deathless and unborn true nature, undying, deathless true nature. Now I'm going to say, if you want to know who or what is reborn, find out who or what is living since you've been born through all these years and decades. That's who or what is continues. There's a continuity like the ripples in the river, but the H2O molecules are continually changing through those ripples, and yet there seems to be separate ripples and world eddies. Yes? That's a good image of our continuity. Like your life karma stream is different than mine. You have the Paul Knitter theological academic background, wherever you came from, and I have my Lamanist kind of jokey jock background, jokey jockiness. But so there's different eddies in the same river with different molecules. So who we are that could be continue is findable by realizing who we are now and last decade and now and next and tomorrow. And that's the direction to look if we really take on this kind of question seriously. We can find out. Maybe not in the way we think, maybe not so measurable. Like Lao Tzu says, this great Tao Te Ching, which I recommend to you, Stephen Mitchell translation, Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. We can't know it, but we can be it at one in our own life. We can't know it, it's not measurable, but we can be it. That's the transpersonal, beyond concepts, beyond non-conceptual gnosis. We can be it at one in our own life.
Yeah, well, even Jung speaks about the S, the capital S, self, as beyond the ego. But as Eckhart Tolle says, well, whatever is real will survive, and our true nature, whenever we feel most truly and deeply ourselves and connected, that's our true nature shining through anyway, and that's always going to be there. So it's kind of, I like what Roshi Bernie Glassman said recently to me, that it's not so much that we kill our ego, it's just we expand. It just expands. Consciousness expands, you know. And whatever that is our true self. And whoever that is, experience it and you'll find out. Or you won't find it out because you won't be there anymore. It'll be your real self that's there. I don't actually say it often to people, but sometimes if I feel I can take it, I say, you're not going to heaven. You, as you are right now in your present consciousness, is not going to heaven. Because that's going to disappear. But who you really are is already in heaven.
You're like good cop, bad cop in one.
Exactly. Am I going to go to heaven? No, definitely not. You know. But your true self is already there. Yes.
Hello, Michael. Hello, I'm Surya. Great to speak with you. I have all sorts of questions, but let me just ask you one brief thing. Would you please comment on the self-immolation of Tibetan nuns?
Yes, that's a big tragedy that's been going on, and it's up to maybe 24 now. Monks and nuns in China, former Tibet, under Chinese domination, who have burned themselves up to bring attention of the world to their plight, following the example of the Vietnamese monks who did it starting in 1961 or 3 to bring the attention of the world to the Vietnam situation.
And civilians too. And civilians.
And civilians too.
The internet or somebody,
Yeah.
a terrible picture of somebody drawing and fire running.
Yes, it's a terrible thing, and the Dalai Lama has asked them to stop and denounced it as a viable protest or political protest. But of course, nobody listens to him, things being what they are in the world. But it's a very complicated question. I've been thinking about it a lot myself. They're very desperate, and China is so powerful and important in the world, and America and other people are moving closer to China for our commercial and other interests. So the Tibetans are an endangered species, and they're very desperate. So I expect it will continue, whatever the Dalai Lama says. That's not to say that China might not change. You know, the Russian Empire fell and the Berlin Wall fell. I never thought we'd see that in our lifetime. I was in Europe when that happened by chance, and it was very surprising. So the Chinese Empire could also break up for economic or other reasons in the next decade or two. But Tibet is having a hard time. There's more Chinese in Tibet than Tibetans now by Chinese design. So the Tibetans may be going the way of the Native Americans, the first people in our own land.
Can you explain how those who immolate themselves might be understanding it from a Tibetan religious point of view? Someone explained as a possibility to me that they were purposely taking on the bad karma of it, you know, to try and absorb it, kind of almost like the way Jesus did on the cross, absorbing the bad karma. But how do you, if you know, I mean, how do they even explain doing it at all from that point of view?
I don't know. I don't think it's so much. I mean, that's a nice explanation, and it may be true to some extent, but I think it's a very political act, and it's also like Jesus on the cross trying to sacrifice oneself, like he was saying, you know, suiciding, self-immolation, it's a tragic thing, and the first precept in Buddhism is to cherish life and not to kill. So certainly suicide is not one of the options, major options, for a Buddhist practitioner especially, but they're sacrificing themselves, like thinking sacrifice one for the good of the many, to try to save Tibet, save the environment and the animals in the forest and the 6 million beleaguered Tibetan people. So that's what they're thinking, like is Bodhi. How much effect that has is not clear. It certainly is bringing some attention, but China is pretty implacable.
Okay, yes, please.
So much of what both of you have said today makes me, the word reconciliation keeps coming to mind, as well as compassion. And reconciling oneself to, I guess, you know the book of Forest Church. Paul, I had the pleasure of hearing you at All Souls. And one of Forrest's lines, the senior minister of All Souls who died a year or two ago, was, religion is the answer to the problem of being alive and having to die. And another of his famous sayings, at least at All Souls, was that what's left of us is the love that we've given away, which I like. I don't like it to be limited to that, but I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the whole issue of time, and as opposed to eternity, and the embracing of death as a part of life, and why do we, you have, in fact, in many of your remarks, talked about death as an inevitable part of the process of life. It's just something we're going through all the time. But time is, in some ways, a human construct. I just wanted to kind of toss this out here to get some, I don't know how I can get traction on the issue of time and death.
I have a whole book on it called Buddhist Standard Time, so there's a lot of different angles on it in there and practices and so on. So I'm going to pass the buck, but you're on the right track, and you're right, we did talk about it a lot. And I think it's not just about death, but about loss, and therefore the practice of letting go. That it's in our higher self-interest to learn to let go a little bit of what in any case is passing through our fingers. Because we throw things away or throw away our kids or our responsibilities, but not grip it so tightly, because it's in any case all these impermanent things slipping through our fingers. And then we can live more fully in the now, really live and not be always dying.
I have your book. I just haven't read it.
But I'd like to hear what you have to say, Michael.
Yeah, well, Zen is very clear on that too, that the past is not real. I mean, it's in our minds, but that's all, and it's in our bodies and the way we feel. And yet none of that is ultimate. You have to learn also to let that go and be healed by the energy of being present in the now. The future doesn't exist either, so all your plans. But to be fully in the now, that time is a construct of the human mind. That time, as Eckhart told us, time is an illusion. Even death is an illusion, he says, in the sense of it's just letting go of the form, of the space and time reality that we identified with and clung to allow our true self to be, all that to be absorbed into our true self.
Does that mean life is an illusion?
Well,
and pain and suffering is an illusion, love is an illusion?
But it means, and as I say, all that is absorbed into something deeper and higher, so that if you can live in the now, fully in the now, everything you're living takes on a new meaning. Because it's part of it, it's in that you call it the eternity of the eternal now, and that most intense moment which most resembles God's own life. So all of that is real, but it's truly real in that context. It's not something that drives you crazy because it's separated from the rest of reality, that you're clinging to, or holding on to, or trying to get rid of all that, the Four Noble Truths, and that basically, learning to live with and be detached from. I also want to point out something really important that I often make a point of this in my homilies. There's been a strand in Christian tradition which sees death as a punishment for sin. Right? That's completely false. Right? Death is natural. the way we sometimes die, as I've just been saying, or struggle against it, it may be may not be fully awakened. But death itself, the continual process of letting go and dying in all sorts of ways, but then finally physically too, has a beauty and a naturalness to it if we can just let it happen. We've talked about their complicated cases, but basically the fact of death is not a punishment. I think so many people through the centuries have been hobbled in their approach to their own self-image and life in the world by saying, we're going to die because we sinned, and that's where dying comes from. That's just not true.
I have difficulty with words because I'm married to a physician. And so to hear, it's so hard because he'll ask me these questions that I hear. And I've been sitting for years. I don't know how long I've been sitting. And I can't explain or even attempt to explain. I don't even know what the spirit body is from our body. I don't understand how to explain time and death. I've worked with children who have lost parents for a long time. I sat with them. I don't think that we can answer these questions that are being asked. I think you need to sit and sit and sit and let go of your mind.
Just shut up. That's why Zen doesn't speak. They say your eyebrows fall out if you talk. So I don't know why mine are still here. No, but of course in the end that's the only answer. There's no answer. Which is why you sit and you just be. Of course.
Well, I think, I don't want to speak for the master here, but you would sit in silence, but when you stand up, try to show as much love and compassion to everyone as you can. So silence, compassion, silence, love. Yeah. I mean, it was implied in what you were saying.
Yeah, that's what happens when you sit. Yeah, should happen.
I'm a Christian from the street, and I'm also a Buddhist from the street. All this knowledge that we have, and that is concentrated in elite institutions, and by the way, enlightenment costs money. How do I work out the situation of Trayvon, the guy who got killed, the young boy who got killed in Miami, and Zimmerman, who happens to be brother because Zimmerman is a Latino man with Indian blood in it? How do I get all this knowledge? Do I sit on it and do nothing? Do I open my own institutions and teach enlightenment? Do I set myself on fire to demonstrate transcendence to them? I think I would like to have that. It's clear to me, but I'm human. I must help. I have to do something. And my church is sleeping.
Don't depend on institutions, and it doesn't cost anything, and you have it. Just wake up to it. You already have it, and when you do wake up, you realize that you are Trayvon and you are Zimmerman. You're both of them, and all the compassion and the right action will come from that, which embraces everything. So unfortunately, we tend to, both in Christianity and Buddhism and everything else, we institutionalize things and you'll charge money for courses and stuff like that. But really, the whole point of it is that it's right there at your fingertips. It's right there in you right now. Everyone and everything.
Well, it is right there, Michael. But to get the training, and sometimes elaborate training, whether you want to, whether it is zazen or sitting in various forms, or whether it's centering prayer. Oftentimes, I just got back from a retreat at Garrison, and a wonderful experience of 2 intense days with Silky Rinpoche. And I looked around at the 50, 60 people there, and we were all white, and we were all middle or upper middle class. You know, so it is. There's a question there that makes me very uneasy.
Yeah.
Were there young people there? I'm also
Yeah.
concerned about that. Was it mostly older people?
I would say 3/4 of them would be kind of older from my point of view. It
Boomers.
doesn't take much
Yeah.
to be. Yeah, no, but probably you know.
Yeah, it's a concern that we all have, but I like what Michael said, you know, like you have it, so use it. It doesn't cost anything. I know what you're talking about. But look, we're here in this building, so we didn't just meet out in the street. So to make tea, you often need water, fire, and a pot. That's the nature of life. Form and emptiness goes together. You can't just have tea without water, fire, a pot, something. Here, have tea. It's not enough. Tea bags, tea leaves. So, yes, and institutions often seem elitist, but as Michael mentioned, his teacher, Bernie Glassman Roshi, even has street retreats, and they're free, and everybody helps feed people and lives on the street together. So there's many ways to look at these things.
Yeah, and there are efforts, you're right, on the part of various institutions to be aware of these class differences and to provide scholarships and provide special opportunities so that it can...
Like today, this is free as far as I know,
Yeah,
so,
right.
so believe for you all and for Union Theological Seminary.
Could you comment on the phenomenon that people report who have had near-death experiences of the white light or hearing the voice, it's not your time yet, or other such things as that, please?
Hear about those things.
Who's first?
Well, and there are studies done now that say, well, this is some particular thing in the brain that makes the white light appear, or it makes you feel like you're standing above your body for the near-death experiences. I don't care how it happens. If these are phenomena that wake people up. I judge by their fruits you will know that. Most people who've gone through experiences like that, or many who have, you know, are utterly transformed by it and have a whole different view of reality. How can that not be good? How can that not be real? The important thing, though, is to realize they aren't dead. They are not dead. It's a near-death experience. Death is a whole different thing. Right? But it's the whole point is it's not their time, and then but it is an experience that helps them wake up. So it seems.
So since you asked, and you're a sincere person, and you're still here, most of you, mostly. I don't want to get into judging those things or evaluating them, but what I'm going to say is just a little like news from the field, is that in Tibet there's a whole genre of stories told by returners from the dead. It's called Daylok, returners from the beyond. We could say it's near-death experiences, which is a recent term for the last few decades in English. In Tibetan it's called Daylok, it's 2,000 years old. People who've come back from the dead or from coma. I don't know if they had the word coma 1,000 years ago in Tibet. These Daylok, and you can read a book called Daylok. You can read about this in certain Lama's autobiographies, like Chaktu Rinpoche, his mother was a Daylok. And the special characteristic of the Dayloks are interesting. The people that come back, they often or always tell very moral stories about the things that they saw in the other worlds. What had happened to the so-called, neighbors, the evil robber had been reborn as a slug without hands and arms, and somebody else was experiencing this or that. So it's often a whole moral tale, very much within the realm of Tibetan Buddhist thinking and cosmology. So that's one thing. So I think we have to say partly it's conditioned by the locale, not the universal folklore. Yeah. And then another thing is just to say, if you're interested in this subject of death and what happens when you die and right after, if you're a meditator, if you're a yogi, maybe even if you're a doctor or a research scientist or a neuroscience person, There's a whole bunch of literature in Tibetan about Tukdam, it's called, Tukdam, like Buddha mind, clear light meditation, that well-known masters, I'm not talking about us, the great masters of Tibetan Buddhism, when they die, they usually sit for 2, 3, 4, 5, 9, 12 days. After the heartbeat is stopped, that's what I'm defining as death. The heartbeat is stopped and the breath, that's what I'm talking about, death, not coma. And they sit in this Tukdam clear light meditation with supposedly some heat in the body and without deteriorating or falling over. And then they finish that and fall over, and then it's over, and then they're really considered dead. So I thought, oh, I've never seen this. This is hard to believe, being me, the skeptic from New York. So, but then I saw it happen, and that was very impressive. And then, doing a little research, I found that in the famous seminal classic before the yoga movement started in America called Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, who was in LA in the 50s, 60s, 70s, a great yogi, Paramahansa Yogananda. He wrote a book this big, Autobiography of a Yogi. We all read it in the 60s, before yoga was so popular and hip and secular. He said he was going to meditate like that to show the power of consciousness over death. Are you familiar with this? If you look in the back of that big book, there's a report notarized by the county coroner doctor of LA County, who the yogi and his people, his ashram, arranged this little experiment. So when the yogi died, the coroner came and said he's dead, and he had him sitting in an air-conditioned room in the mortuary, and he observed him for 40 days and 40 nights, sitting in this state without deteriorating. You can find this in the public record. So I don't know what the hell this means, but I think it means we don't know as much as we think we know about these things. This was attested to by the LA County medical people as a little experiment. And even a copy of that document is in the book. You can find it easily. It's very, very interesting, these things that, you know, beyond life, beyond death, beyond our mind, beyond modern science. And I think it reminds me just to not be so dogmatic or believe in anything. You don't hear me telling you here, you have to believe in rebirth. You know, that's not the way of awakening beliefs. It's about experience and gnosis and transformation and realization, not mere beliefs.
Could that have been suicide by embalming fluid?
I don't think he caused himself to die. What I'm saying was, as he got older and then they prepared the experiment, and then when he did die, then he sat and meditated like that and was observed.
Kind of like the incorruptibles.
Without embalming
bodies
fluid.
of the saints, too.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to take one last comment or question, and time is moving quickly, or whatever it is, eternity is pressing.
It's not quick, it's just an answer. You can sit anywhere in a church for free. I have it up in Connecticut at the First Congregational. Russ Michaels here has a whole list of places to sit free. He started a place up in his church in White Plains. I teach meditation in the chapel in our hospital. Just look around, you'll find places, and you don't have to pay a dime. And then when you want to go on a retreat, there'll be scholarships. Come and talk to Russ if you're interested.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. That's both good to know and a wonderful example. Well, do either of you care to make any concluding remarks, last words of wisdom?
We who are about to die salute you. As the gladiators used to say.
Maybe just one thing that, you know, I know I or we and other people can appear academic in talking about some of these things, and we're flying off in all sorts of directions, and then you're brought down to earth by people's really existential grappling with death of loved ones, but yes, loved ones, yeah, children. I just want to say, and I hope it might have been clear at moments, you know, that I've come to these experiences and insights not from any academic, you know, approach, but you know, it's life and death matters in my own mind, you know, of how to live and find happiness and find truth and find relief, and compassion and love in this world. So it's existential. So I apologize if I sometimes seem like I'm rough, flitting off into the universe somewhere, in my head, because that's not the way it feels, and that's not how I got there.
Well, I think this really this verifies and embodies what we're hoping can happen more and more. Yes, here at Union Theological Seminary, but elsewhere. Just the excitement and the opportunities when people from different religious traditions really sit down and talk to each other. And how much there is to be learned and the questions, but kind of this is a challenge for people who consider themselves religious in one way or another. To be religious, you really have to get to know people who are religious differently than you. And when you do that, a lot of good can come. So let's say thank you to both of our...
Thank you for being such troopers and for allowing us to steal 2 hours from your lives. Thank you.
Thank you for hosting this here also.